President Biden doubling down against big oil. His administration is releasing 15 million more barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The president is set to speak on the measures in the next couple of hours. Biden also setting out a plan to refill the reserve. Just a reminder, this is oil stored in 60 giant salt caverns in Texas as well as Louisiana. We've got Yahoo Finance contributor Kevin Cirilli on the story for us today. Kevin, how much of this is really about the midterms trying to keep the cap there on gas prices as voters sort of think about that?
Well, there's definitely a midterm political domestic politics angle here, but there's also a geopolitical angle. But we are anticipating, as you alluded to, that President Biden is going to release 15 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He's going to make those remarks later this afternoon. But he's also going to do something else, and that is to say that the administration will repurchase crude oil when the U.S. energy benchmark West Texas Intermediate hits between $67 and $72 per barrel. And what essentially the administration is saying is, quote, this repurchase approach will protect taxpayers and help create certainty around future demand for crude oil. That will encourage firms to invest in production right now, helping to improve U.S. energy security and bring down energy prices that have been driven up by Putin's war in Ukraine.
And Kevin, specifically, there's other measures that have kind of been floated around. We know these big oil companies have approached the Department of Energy, the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, really saying that there should not be some kind of ban on exports going out of the U.S. at a time when the anticipation is that Europe will implement those sanctions against Russian oil coming in December. I mean, as you point out, a lot of pieces to connect here, but are we expecting any kind of measures on that front to be announced from the White House?
Well, potentially. And 3 points here. First and foremost, economically, the average price of gas that the U.S. consumer is facing right now is about $3.87 per gallon. That's up, get this, 20 cents from just over a month ago and nearly 56 cents when you compare it to a year ago. So when you couple that with high inflation at about 8.1% in the United States, not to mention, as you said, in Europe, where in the UK, it's 10.1%. Workers around the world, especially in Europe and the United States, are feeling the brunt of this. But secondly, to take this back to the U.S. midterm election cycle, just last night in Miami, when Senator Marco Rubio was up on stage debating Val Demings, his Democratic challenger, he essentially said that, quote, our oil reserves do not exist to win midterms, end quote. The Republicans are seizing on this. They view this as a winning issue. They want to increase domestic U.S. oil production, and they don't think that the administration should just be utilizing the strategic oil reserves. In contrast to that, there's a political context to this that the President Biden's expected to make later this afternoon, and that is that they are declaring political war against big oil, and they are going to try to especially target big oil profits that have been made throughout the pandemic, and they feel that drawing that contrast is a way for them to mobilize the base of their party, especially those who have interest on climate change, while essentially trying to have it both ways by releasing some from the strategic oil reserves. And then quickly, the third and final point is the geopolitics. You can't ignore Putin's war with Ukraine and the impact that that's having on European oil. But you also can't ignore that the pressure that this has now caused on the U.S. Saudi relationship. And already, again, on Capitol Hill, you're hearing members of both parties, quite frankly, criticize the Saudis, who, of course, run OPEC, for their decision. And this impact is especially going to, I think, reveal the leverage that some foreign governments have in terms of impacting the everyday U.S. consumer.
Yeah, and we've seen a number of lawmakers coming out and talking about restricting arms sales, for example, to Saudi Arabia. Yep. On that second point that you just made, though, about sort of fight that we're seeing play out between the administration and then big oil, the reality is these reserves are at their lowest in decades. Yep. I mean, the administration needs big oil to be on board, right? What does that look like right now?
Well, privately, the energy sector here in Washington, D.C., the energy lobby, are I would say, rolling their eyes because look, President Biden comes from Delaware. This was a state that has a heavy refinery contingency in the state, but it's really reflective of the dynamics within the Democratic Party right now, where you have the moderates who are potentially more moderate on this issue. But again, you have this new wing of progressives on the flank of the party who are trying to really move the party much more to the left, especially as it relates to climate change. And so this puts President Biden in a significant political debacle, because here you have an issue that, according to most polls, virtually all polls, including the CBS poll that came out just the other week, where the economy is the #1 issue amongst independent voters. And in states like Florida, where, again, Senator Rubio is beating Demings, according to polls, the average of polls of Real Clear Politics, by 5 percentage points. Or look at a state like Pennsylvania, where in the Senate race there, Matt Minaj, the Republican, challenging John Fetterman, the progressive, those polls have tightened. Energy, inflation. These are the closing arguments that Republicans are making in their closing bid as we lead up to the midterm elections.
Just a few more weeks to go.
Yeah.
It should get interesting. Kevin Cirilli, as always, appreciate your insight.